Hello, my name is Ethan Miller. I'm taking Gina Warren's English 119 class, and today I will be going over bad listening habits and their effects. My goal today is to teach you the different types of bad listening habits that exist and their effects that they can have on relationships or people, and show you a few different examples of these bad listening habits being used in very casual and everyday conversation. So, what are bad listening habits? Bad listening habits are things that are done in conversation that cause people to fail to actively engage with a speaker. So, bad listening habits are things that we see in everyday life, and they are things that have been used by us in our own conversations. Um, Either you are not paying attention to what somebody is telling you, or somebody is not paying attention to what you are telling them. And that is one of the more basic examples of what a bad listening habit is, as the different examples of bad listening habits are pseudo listening, stage hogging, selective listening, and filling in the gaps. And while that is a pretty lengthy list in terms of bad listening habits, I've seen a couple of resources mention that there are over 10 different styles of bad listening habits, but those are the ones that I'm going to be mainly focusing on today, and throughout this presentation, with the main focus of examples being pseudo listening and stage hogging. And for the photo that is being used in this slide, that is a perfect representation of what pseudo listening is, which I'm going to explain in more detail in a second. So, definitions of bad listening habits being used. As mentioned before, pseudo listening, the full definition of pseudo listening is having a conversation with somebody but not paying attention to what they are saying. Stage hogging is expressing one's own ideas without inviting others to share theirs. And filling in the gaps is manufacturing information that wasn't part of the original message or story. Now, with pseudo listening, in the picture shown before and the picture shown in this slide, pseudo listening is when somebody is having a conversation with you, or you are having a conversation with somebody, and your mind or their mind is somewhere else. They're thinking about a vacation that they went on, they're thinking about what they're going to be doing later, or they're just thinking about something that is generally not important to the conversation that you are having with them, and completely avoiding and not paying attention to what you are saying. We see pseudo listening being used in a lot of different areas. We see them being used in everyday conversation. We see them used a lot in workplaces, whether an employee is not paying attention to a customer or a customer is not paying attention to an employee. And we also see this a lot in schools, where students will not be paying attention to what their teachers are saying, and their mind will be focusing on something else while their teacher is giving a lecture or a presentation. Now, stage hogging is something that you can see a lot between communication and conversations between friends. And this is when somebody will entirely take over a conversation and only express their own, as mentioned, ideas or thoughts. And a good example of this is two friends are talking about, say, a vacation that one of them went on, and somebody within the conversation is only talking about their experience with vacations and isn't allowing the other person to share their experiences. And filling in the gaps is something that is seen a lot in terms of conversations between friends when they're sharing information that was told by somebody else. Um, Filling in the gaps, as in its definition, is filling in parts of the story or filling in information that wasn't a part of the original story. And so this can create a lot to make somebody look worse or hurt somebody's reputation in conversation, because you or the person who is talking to you is giving you information that wasn't originally told to them. So, example of bad listening habits being used. I know I just gave a few, but I wanted to give some a little bit more in depth. Example 1, John is sharing a very personal story with Brian, and Brian is responding with very basic answers like uh-huh or yep. But in reality, Brian is thinking about the game on the TV behind John. So this is an example of pseudo-listening because Brian is not paying attention to what John is having to say and is focusing mainly on the game that is happening behind John. So this is a perfect example of pseudo-listening, and this is something that is done very often and is a very common thing to see in terms of bad listening habits. The second example is Steve is sharing a very personal experience with Kevin, but Kevin only responds with stories and experiences of his own, completely avoiding what Steve is saying. This is an example of stage hogging. And the reason that this is stage hogging is because Kevin is only talking about his own experiences and is only talking about himself. He's not making comments to what Steve is having to say or is giving constructive feedback to what Steve is having to say. Kevin is only responding with his own experiences and his own feelings towards his situation. So that is a good example of stage hogging. Now, both of these are, I'm sure, are situations that you have experienced with other people or things that you have done to other people. Now, the effects that bad listening habits have on friends, what they can do to a person, and I'm sure everybody has felt this in one way or another. Bad listening habits can make a person feel unimportant and unheard by the person who is listening to them. And this is a very important thing to pay attention to because, as I'm sure we have all felt, when somebody is not paying attention to you or not listening to you, it can really hurt your feelings and can make you not want to communicate with that particular person anymore, which leads into what can bad listening habits do to a friendship. And when a person feels unheard or unimportant by the person that they are talking to, the friendship can ultimately be hurt and can lead people to not become as close of friends or not become friends at all. And obviously, when you are sharing information with a friend that can be very important to you or just generalized conversation, you want to be heard and you want to be respected when you are talking. And so if you don't feel that respect or that you don't get that feeling of being heard, it is very likely for that friendship to end or you to not want to be very close with the person that you are talking to. So for the conclusion, bad listening habits are used in conversation to allow the listener to either take over the conversation or not focus on the conversation at all. And bad listening habits are things that we want to try to avoid and we don't want to do. There are many different styles of bad listening habits, and all of them have negative impacts on a conversation. The type of negative impact that each bad listening habit has on a conversation varies from which one is happening in that particular situation, but all of them have a negative impact on the conversation or the people within the conversation. And to finish it off, I would just say practice good listening habits so that you can have healthy relationships with all of your friends and you can have good relationships with all of your friends because people, preferably when you pay attention to them, they will most likely in turn pay attention to what you have to say. So it is just good overall to practice good listening habits and listen to what people have to say when they are choosing to share information with you. And this is my Works Cited page. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. And yeah, that is it.